Jonah Hale had never liked markets. They were always loud, crowded, and full of people pretending not to look at one another. The interstellar exchange was worse than most. It floated in open space like a ring of metal and light, filled with voices from 100 species, each speaking in different sounds, tones, and rhythms. Some voices clicked. Some hummed. Some spoke words Jonah could understand only because of the translator in his ear. He moved slowly, hands behind his back, trying not to draw attention. Humans were still rare in this part of the galaxy. When people noticed him, they stared just a little too long. Jonah ignored them and focused on the information panel in front of him. The listing glowed softly. Royal Custodial Transfer, Saleth of House Virix status. Blind evaluation. Non-aesthetic political value. Moderate term. Lifetime ceremonial holding. Jonah felt his jaw tighten. He had seen many listings like this during the past year. Prisoners, bonded laborers, ceremonial dependents. All legal. All clean on paper. All ugly when you read the details. Most buyers never did. They glanced at the surface summary, checked the price, and moved on. Jonah opened the extended contract file. Lines and lines of legal language scrolled past his eyes. He read every word carefully, the way he always did. It was the habit that had kept him alive back when he was a systems engineer on failing colonies. Miss one line, and the airlocks didn't open, or the water didn't flow. This contract was old. Very old. It had been rewritten many times, adjusted to new galactic laws, but the core was still there. Saleth was a princess of a minor house that had lost its political power generations ago. Her blindness made her unsuitable for marriage alliances. Her appearance, judged by dominant species standards, made her undesirable even for display, so she had been placed into ceremonial custody. Not a prison, not slavery, just ownership with polite words. Jonah exhaled slowly. He scrolled farther, and then he saw it. A clause hidden deep in the contract, written in careful, neutral language. A clause most buyers ignored because it didn't affect profit. Custodial transfer may be terminated if a buyer assumes full legal responsibility for the subject's autonomy, welfare, and future representation, including the option of voluntary abdication from all ceremonial titles. Jonah's finger stopped moving. There it was. The door no one bothered to open. He checked the price again. High, but not impossible. Jonah had sold most of his assets for this. A ship. Old savings. Years of careful planning. He confirmed the transaction. The panel flashed once, then went still. A nearby broker looked up in surprise. You completed the purchase, the broker said, its voice a smooth blend of sound and light. Are you aware of the subject's condition? Yes, Jonah said simply. Blind. Non-aesthetic. Politically obsolete. Yes. Lifetime term. Jonah nodded.
Not for long?
The broker paused, clearly confused, but said nothing more. The system had accepted the payment. The contract was now his responsibility. A soft chime echoed through the exchange. Somewhere deeper inside the station, Princess Saleth was told that she had been bought. She sat in silence when the attendant delivered the message. Saleth had learned long ago not to react too quickly to news. Reactions invited attention, and attention usually brought disappointment. The attendant's voice was careful, almost bored. Your custodial ownership has been transferred. A human has completed the purchase. A human. Saleth tilted her head slightly, listening to the hum of the room. She could not see the attendant, but she could hear the faint movement of fabric, the quiet tapping of claws on the floor. Is there anything else? Saleth asked. The attendant hesitated. No. You will be prepared for transport. Saleth nodded once. When the attendant left, the room felt very large and very empty. She folded her hands in her lap, tracing the familiar patterns etched into the surface of the chair. Every object she owned had textures instead of colors, raised lines, soft curves, sharp warnings. Blindness was not rare among her people, but it was inconvenient. It made ceremonies difficult. It made her quiet, unseen in a culture that valued display. She had been told many times that she was lucky. Lucky to be kept, lucky to be fed, lucky to be owned by institutions instead of individuals. A human buyer was unexpected. Humans had strange reputations. Some said they were kind. Others said they were dangerous. Most agreed they were unpredictable. Salith prepared herself for another cage. Perhaps one that smelled different, sounded different, but was still a cage. She did not cry. There was no reason to. When Jonah arrived to receive her, he asked for privacy. The station officials were surprised by the request, but it was within his rights as the buyer. They led Salith into a small transfer chamber and stepped away. Jonah heard her before he saw her. Her breathing was slow and controlled. Her movements were careful, measured. When she stood, she did so with a grace that came from memorizing space rather than seeing it. She was smaller than he expected. "Hello," Jonah said gently. Salith turned toward the sound of his voice, her head tilting slightly as if tuning an instrument. "You are the human," she said.
"Yes," Jonah replied. "My name is Jonah Hale."
There was a pause. "I am Salith," she said. "Of House Virex." Jonah waited, giving her time. He knew silence could feel heavy, especially for someone used to being spoken at instead of spoken to. "I want you to know," he said carefully, "that I've read your contract." Salith's fingers tightened on the fabric of her sleeves. Most buyers didn't. "That means," Jonah continued, "that I understand what you've been through and what you haven't been allowed to choose." She said nothing. "I'm not here to rush you," Jonah said. "But there are things we need to talk about, things you have rights to hear." Her voice was very quiet when she spoke.
Am I being transferred now? Yes, Jonah said, but not the way you think. He stepped aside and placed a small device on the table between them.
It hummed softly, projecting sound rather than light. "This is my ship," he said. "It's not large. It's not impressive. But it's comfortable. I had it modified."
"Modified? Salith.
Tactile flooring. Adaptive interfaces. You won't have to rely on anyone to move around. Her breathing changed slightly.
No buyer has ever... She stopped herself. Jonah didn't interrupt.
"I did not buy you to own you," he said at last. "I bought your contract." Salith froze. "That is not a distinction," she said slowly.
"It is," Jonah replied. "Legally
and practically." He activated another file, letting the audio read the clause aloud. The words filled the chamber, calm and official. When it finished, Silas sat very still. "You can abdicate," Jonah said. "You can end the ceremonial holding. You can choose what comes next." There was a long silence. Salith's hands trembled just a little.
You could be lying, she said. I could, Jonah agreed.
"But I've already filed the paperwork!"
Her head lifted sharply. "Already?" "Yes," Jonah said. "It will process once you confirm. Or it won't, if you don't want it to." She swallowed. No one had ever asked her what she wanted. Not truly. Not with consequences. "What is your price?" she asked quietly. Jonah frowned.
"There isn't one." There is always a reason, Salith said.
Humans do not spend resources without purpose.
Jonah smiled a little. That might be true.
My purpose is simple.
He paused, choosing his words. I don't like systems that pretend cruelty is kindness. Salith let out a sound she did not recognize as her own. It was not a sob, not laughter, something in between. If I leave, she said, I will have nothing. Jonah nodded. Then we start from there. The chamber door opened softly, signaling that transport was ready. Salith stood slowly, her hand hovering in the air. Jonah did not grab it. He simply placed his own hand nearby, close enough to find if she wished. After a moment, she touched his fingers. They were warm. For the first time since she could remember, Salith stepped forward, without being led. And somewhere deep in the exchange, unnoticed by most, a very old system began to crack. Not with violence, but with paperwork, patience, and a human who read the fine print. The ship felt different from anything Salith had known before. She noticed it the moment she stepped inside. The floor beneath her feet was warm and gently textured, changing slightly with each step. A soft sound followed her movement, not loud, not sharp, just enough to let her know where she was in the space. The air hummed quietly, steady and calm. Like a slow breath, Jonah did not rush her. He closed the hatch and waited as she stood still, listening. You can take your time, he said. Nothing here will move unless you tell it to. That sentence stayed with her. Nothing will move unless you tell it to. She lifted one foot, then the other, testing the floor. The sound shifted, guiding her. When she turned her head, the hum changed direction slightly, letting her understand where walls and open space were. This ship speaks, she said softly. Jonah smiled. In its own way, yeah. He guided her through the ship, but never touched her unless she asked. When she reached out, he described what her fingers would meet. Smooth panels, rounded corners, fabric walls that absorbed sound instead of reflecting it harshly.
This used to be a cargo runner, Jonah explained. I stripped it down and rebuilt most of it. For me? Salith asked.
For anyone, Jonah said. But I was thinking of you. That honesty made her chest feel tight.
They reached a small room. This is yours, Jonah said.
If you want it, sleeping space. Personal controls. The interface is voice-based, but there are tactile backups. Salith walked slowly around the room, memorizing it. The bed was low and wide. The walls carried faint patterns she could trace. There was a window, but she could not see it. Still, she could feel a gentle warmth there, the presence of stars beyond. She sat on the edge of the bed. I don't understand, she said. If I abdicate, you gain nothing. Jonah leaned against the doorway. I gain a clear conscience. She turned toward his voice. That is not a currency. Maybe not where you're from, he said, but it matters to humans. She was quiet for a long time after that. The ship moved smoothly into transit. There was no sudden force, no sharp pull, just a gentle shift, like being carried on water. Salith lay back on the bed and listened to the sound of the engines. They were low and steady, not aggressive. She had slept on many ships before, but never like this. Never without guards. Never without rules. Never with a door that did not lock from the outside. Her thoughts kept returning to the clause Jonah had read aloud. Abdication. Release. Choice. Choice was frightening. Choice meant responsibility. She did not sleep much during the first cycle. Jonah spent that time in the common area, reviewing messages. The moment the transfer had gone through, alerts had started arriving. Questions, warnings, some polite, some less so. Why did a human purchase a ceremonial dependent? What were his intentions? Did he understand the political implications? Jonah ignored most of them. One message, however, came from a legal authority within the exchange. Custodial responsibility confirmation required. Subject consent pending. Jonah recorded a reply.
"This is Jonah Hale," he said calmly. "I acknowledge full responsibility."
Subject consent will be given freely or not at all. He sent it and leaned back in his chair. Humans had a reputation for being loud, emotional, reckless. He knew the truth was quieter. They were stubborn. The next cycle, Salith joined him in the common area. She had navigated there on her own. Jonah looked up, surprised. "Good morning. I followed the sound of water," she said. "Is that real?" He laughed softly. "Yeah, I like the noise." She sat at the table, running her fingers over its surface.
"May I ask something?" "Of course. Why did you choose me?" she asked. "There were others."
"Many others." Jonah thought for a moment. "Because your contract had an exit," he said, "and because no one else had taken it. That is all? That's enough." She nodded slowly. They ate together. The food was unfamiliar to her, but Jonah had taken care to include textures and flavors she could identify easily. He described what she was eating, not in technical terms, but in feelings. Warm, crisp, soft. Sweet. After the meal, Jonah sat across from her. "There's no deadline," he said, "but the station will ask soon whether you choose to abdicate." Salith folded her hands. "If I say yes, what happens?" "You stop being a princess," Jonah said. "Legally, you become an individual. You can study, travel, work, or do nothing at all."
"And you?" "I become the human who bought a contract and then destroyed it," Jonah said. She made a small sound.
"That will cause trouble. It already has," he said easily. Silence settled between them. "I have never made a decision this large," Salith said. "Every path I know was chosen for me." Jonah nodded. "Then start small." "How? Decide where we go next?" he said. "Not where you end up, just where we stop first." She considered this.
There is a learning station, she said slowly, for sensory sciences.
Sound mapping, language patterns.
Jonah smiled. "That's a good place. I would like to go there," she said.
Before deciding anything else.
"Then that's where we'll go."
She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. As the ship changed course, messages continued to spread through quiet channels. A human had purchased a royal custodial contract. A human had not claimed the asset. A human was offering abdication. Observers argued. Some said it was a trick. Some said it was pointless. Some said it was dangerous. Humans were watching too. Not many of them, but enough. On distant stations and quiet ships, humans read the details and nodded to themselves. "That sounds like us." Days passed. Salith learned the ship sounds the way one might learn a language. Each tone meant something. Each vibration had a purpose. She moved more freely now, no longer afraid of sudden restraint. One evening, as the ship drifted through a quiet stretch of space, she spoke again. "If I abdicate," she said, "my house will lose its last symbol." Jonah looked at her.
"Are you worried about that?" She thought carefully. "I am worried that they will say I was ungrateful." Jonah considered this.
"They probably will. That frightens me." He nodded. "That makes sense. But," she continued, "they already decided my worth. I am tired of carrying it." Jonah said nothing. She straightened her posture.
"I will abdicate," she said,
Jonah did not celebrate.
He did not cheer. He simply activated the console and slid it toward her. "The system will read the declaration aloud," he said. "You can stop it at any time." She placed her hand on the panel. The words filled the room, clear and formal. When it finished, the system paused. "Confirm," it said. Saelith swallowed.
"I confirm," she said. There was a soft chime.
Nothing exploded. Nothing dramatic happened. But somewhere, records changed. Titles vanished. Ownership ended. The system spoke again. "Subject status updated. Custodial contract terminated." Sayla sat very still. Jonah watched her closely. How do you feel?" She searched for the answer. "Light," she said finally. "And afraid?" He smiled gently. "That sounds about right." The ship continued forward, carrying two people who were no longer buyer and asset, but something undefined and new. And far behind them, in places built on quiet cruelty and polite ownership, people began to notice a strange thing. A contract had been broken, and the galaxy had not collapsed. The learning station was quieter than Saelith expected. When the ship docked, she listened carefully, mapping the space through sound. The station did not shout its presence. It hummed gently, like a place built for thinking rather than trading. The floor vibrated softly under her feet, and distant voices echoed in wide, open halls. Jonah walked beside her, not in front.
"This place smells different,"
Saelith said.
Jonah inhaled. "Metal, recycled air, and plants, I think."
"They try to grow things here. I like it," she said. They were greeted by an automated guide that spoke slowly and clearly, adjusting its pace when it realized Saelith was blind. It asked permission before giving directions. It asked again before offering assistance. Saelith noticed. No one had ever asked her permission so many times in such a short span. Jonah registered her as an independent visitor, not as his responsibility. The system paused when it processed the request, then accepted it. "Status. Individual," it said. "Welcome." The word settled deep inside her. Individual. They spent the first day exploring the station. Saelith learned the sound of corridors, the way footsteps echoed differently near classrooms and open research spaces. She learned how to use the tactile maps embedded in the walls. She learned that here, questions were encouraged. She asked many. Jonah watched her change without interfering. She walked a little faster now. Her voice carried more confidence, less careful politeness. That evening, Jonah sat alone in the ship, reviewing more messages. Some were curious, some were critical. One message repeated itself across several networks, forwarded again and again.
"Why did the human free her?" Jonah sighed.
Humans were not used to being asked that question. They were more often asked why they took something.
Saelith returned later than he expected. "You stayed out longer today," Jonah said.
"I was listening," she replied. "To lectures."
He smiled. "And they talk about patterns," she said. "How sound can build maps. How touch can replace sight. I thought my blindness made me lesser. They speak as if it is only different." Jonah leaned back.
"That's because it is?"
She hesitated.
"Do humans really believe that?"
Some do," he said honestly.
Some don't. We argue about it a lot.
She laughed softly. It was still a new sound. Over the next few days, Saelith met others, scientists, students, travelers. Some were kind, some were awkward. Some did not know what to say to a blind alien who had once been a princess. But none of them owned her. That mattered. She began attending classes regularly, not officially enrolled, not yet, but allowed to sit and listen. She learned about sound navigation systems developed by humans who had lost their sight in accidents. She learned about cultures where vision was not the primary sense. She learned that humans had built entire cities underground, in darkness, and called them home. One afternoon, a lecturer asked if anyone wished to share a different perspective on sensory experience. Salith raised her hand. The room went quiet. She spoke carefully at first, choosing simple words. "I was taught that blindness was a flaw," she said, "that it made me unfit. But I have always known space through sound and memory. I know people by their breath." "I know rooms by how they answer me," no one interrupted. "I think societies decide what is valuable," she continued, "and then punish those who do not fit that choice." The room stayed silent for a long moment. Then the lecturer said, "Thank you." Word spread. Not loudly, not dramatically, but people talked. A blind alien princess who had abdicated her title and was now speaking freely. Some thought it was inspiring. Some thought it was dangerous. Meanwhile, Jonah was called into a private communication channel. The face that appeared was not human. "Jonah Hale," the voice said.
You have caused administrative disruption, Jonah nodded. I get that a lot.
"You exploited a legal loophole," the voice continued. "I followed the contract," Jonah said. "Exactly as written. Your actions encourage others to question custodial systems." Jonah leaned forward. "Good." The voice paused. "Humans are strange. You dismantle structures without replacing them." And Jonah smiled faintly. "We replace them with choices." The channel closed. That night, Salith found Jonah sitting quietly, staring at the stars through the window she could not see. "They are afraid," she said. He looked at her, surprised. "How did you know?" "They stop asking what you did," she said, "and start asking what will happen next." Jonah chuckled. "You're learning fast." "I have had time," she said. "Too much time before." She sat beside him. "Jonah," she said, "do humans ever regret interfering?" "All the time," he said.
But we regret not interfering more. She nodded. The next day, Salith received a message.
It was from her former house. The message was cold and formal. It spoke of shame, of lost tradition, of embarrassment. It reminded her of all she had been given. She listened to it. Once. Then, she deleted it. Her hands shook afterward, but her voice did not.
I thought it would hurt more, she said to Jonah later.
"Sometimes," Jonah replied, "relief feels like numbness at first." That evening, she submitted her enrollment request, not as a princess, not as a symbol. When the acceptance came through, she held the device in her hands for a long time, feeling its smooth edges. "I will study sensory linguistics," she said. "I want to help others navigate worlds not built for them." Jonah smiled. "That sounds like a very human thing to do." She tilted her head. "That a compliment? Absolutely." As weeks passed, more stories like hers began to surface. A bonded worker freed through contract clauses, a ceremonial dependent released through abdication. Humans were not the only ones doing it, but they were often the first. They read, they questioned. They asked why systems existed. Other species watched, uneasy. Humans did not invade. They did not demand change. They simply showed that change was possible. One evening, Salith stood alone in a lecture hall after everyone had left. She traced the patterns on the walls, listening to the echo of her own steps. For the first time in her life, the future felt wide instead of narrow. Jonah waited outside. "You didn't come in," she said.
I didn't want to interrupt, he replied. She smiled.
"I am glad you did," she said. You gave me space before I knew how to use it. He shrugged. Humans are good at that sometimes. They walked back to the ship together. Not buyer and owned, not rescuer and rescued, just two people moving forward. And far beyond the learning station, in places ruled by tradition and quiet control, administrators reread contracts they had ignored for centuries and felt something new. Unease. Time changed shape for Salith. It no longer felt like something that pressed down on her, slow and heavy, measured by ceremonies and waiting.
Now it moved in small pieces. Class hours, meals with Jonah, quiet walks through the station where she practiced mapping new spaces.
She had been studying for several cycles when she realized something important. People listened to her, not because of what she had been, but because of what she said. In one of her classes, the instructor asked the group to work together on a project about non-visual navigation. Salith offered an idea, careful at first, expecting polite dismissal. Instead, the others leaned closer. They asked questions. They built on her thoughts.
After class, one of the students walked beside her. You explain space differently, the student said.
It makes more sense to me. Salith paused. Even though I cannot see? Maybe because you cannot see, the student replied. That stayed with her all day. Jonah noticed the change as well. She spoke with more certainty now. Her steps were firmer. She no longer waited for permission to exist in a space. One evening, Jonah returned to the ship to find Salith sitting at the table, surrounded by data pads.
You look busy, he said. I have been invited, she replied.
He raised an eyebrow. Invited where? To speak, she said.
At a discussion forum about custodial systems.
Jonah went very still. You don't have to, he said carefully. I know, Salith replied.
That is why I want to. The forum was not large. It was not broadcast widely.
Just scholars, legal experts, and a few observers from different systems. But Salith understood something now. Change did not need a stage. It needed words. When her turn came, she stood calmly. She did not raise her voice. I was owned politely, she said. No chains. No punishment. Only rules that never asked my opinion.
Some shifted uncomfortably. I was told I was protected, she continued.
But protection without choice is just another kind of cage.
No one interrupted. I do not blame my people, she said.
They followed tradition. But tradition should serve life, not replace it.
Questions followed. Some were honest.
Some were sharp. She answered all of them, not as a victim, not as a princess, as someone who had lived inside the system and stepped out. Afterward, Jonah waited quietly. You were very clear, he said. She let out a slow breath.
I was afraid! Still did it, he said.
She smiled. Messages followed, requests for consultation, invitations to advise. Quiet inquiries from those who wanted to understand how contracts could change without collapsing entire systems. Salith did not answer all of them. She chose carefully. Jonah watched her learn how to say no. That, more than anything, told him she was truly free. Not everyone was pleased. One message arrived with unusual priority. It came from a regional authority representing several custodial institutions. The tone was polite. Too polite. They wished to meet. Jonah read it twice, then showed it to Salith.
They want to understand, she said. They want to control damage, Jonah replied.
She nodded. Still, I should go.
I'll be there,
Jonah said. The meeting room was large and carefully neutral. Voices echoed softly. The air was cool. The representatives spoke in careful language. They praised stability. They spoke of balance. They warned of unintended consequences. Salith listened. Then she spoke.
You fear chaos, she said.
But what you call stability is only familiar suffering, one of them replied. You benefited from the system. Salith did not hesitate.
I survived it.
Silence followed. We cannot dismantle everything, another said. I am not asking you to, Salith replied. I am asking you to read what you have already written. Jonah smiled quietly. After the meeting, as they walked back through the station, Salith's steps slowed. Did I do wrong? She asked. No, Jonah said. You made them uncomfortable. That's different. She thought about that. Later that night, Salith sat alone in her room. She touched the wall patterns she had memorized weeks ago. They felt familiar now, comforting. She remembered the room she had lived in before, silent, empty, waiting. This room felt alive. She realized something else then. She did not miss being a princess. She missed being unseen, because being seen meant being expected to speak, to act, to choose. That frightened her, but it also felt right. The next day, she made a decision. I want to return, she told Jonah. He looked surprised. Where? To my home system, she said. Not to rule! Not to reclaim anything! Just to speak. Jonah studied her face.
They may not welcome you, he said. I know, she replied.
But others like me are still there. He nodded slowly. Then we'll go. The journey took time. Silith used it to prepare. She did not write speeches. She practiced listening. When they arrived, the space felt heavier. Familiar sounds brought back old habits. She straightened her posture unconsciously, then relaxed it again. The reception was tense but calm. She was no longer royal. She had no authority, but people gathered. Out of curiosity, out of confusion, out of quiet hope. Salith spoke simply. I left because I was allowed to, she said. Not because I was special. Because the system already allowed it.
She described the clause.
The choice. The fear. Some listened closely. Some turned away. That was enough. That night Jonah asked her, Are you satisfied? She considered the question. No, she said, but I am at peace. They left soon after. As the ship moved away, Salith felt something loosen inside her. She had closed the door. Ahead of them, messages continued to spread. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. Systems were being reviewed, clauses reread, questions asked. Human involvement was noted, but not always needed anymore. Jonah sat back in his chair, tired. We started something, he said. Silith shook her head gently. You started nothing. You stopped pretending not to see. He smiled. And somewhere across the galaxy, old systems shifted. Not because they were attacked, but because someone had finally stood inside them and said, This does not have to be forever. The galaxy did not change all at once. That was something Salith learned as time passed. Stories liked sudden endings, loud moments where everything turned bright and new. Real life was quieter. It shifted slowly, like stars moving across the sky, easy to miss if you were not paying attention. Salith was paying attention now. She stood in a wide hall on the learning station, listening to voices echo around her. The space was full, more than it had ever been before. Scholars, officials, students, and visitors from many systems had gathered. Some were curious, some were cautious, some were clearly uncomfortable. She was not. Not anymore. Jonah stood near the back, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. He was trying very hard to look unimportant. Salith smiled a little when she sensed him there. The moderator spoke first, explaining the purpose of the gathering. It was called a review forum, a place to discuss reforms, interpretations, and personal testimony. Salith disliked the careful words. When her turn came, she stepped forward. She did not clear her throat. She did not wait for silence.
She simply began, "I was once described as an asset."
She said,
Not because I worked. Not because I produced anything.
but because I existed. The room grew quiet.
"I was called, protected," she continued, "because I was fed and housed."
But no one asked me where I wanted to go, or who I wanted to be. She paused, listening to the sound of her own breathing. I am not angry, she said. Anger requires energy I would rather use elsewhere. A few soft sounds of surprise moved through the room. I am here because a human read a contract, she said simply. Jonah shifted slightly, uncomfortable. That is all, Salith continued. He did not fight anyone. He did not make demands. He did not rescue me. He just refused to pretend the system was kind. She lifted her head. If one person can leave, she said, then others can too. And if others can leave, then we must ask why they stay. The silence after that was deep. Then questions came. They were calmer now than they had been before. How do we protect dependence without removing choice? How do we change tradition without breaking society? What happens when those we protect choose differently than we expect? Salith answered slowly.
You protect by supporting, she said. You change by listening.
And when others choose differently, you accept that safety and freedom are not the same thing. When it ended, the room did not erupt in applause. Instead, people talked quietly, which Salith thought was better. Later, Jonah joined her as she walked back toward the ship. You did something big today, he said. She shook her head. I said something small many times. That's usually how big things happen, Jonah replied. They did not stay long on the station after that. Salith had been offered a permanent position, research, teaching, advising. She accepted some, declined others. She learned that freedom was not about saying yes to everything. It was about knowing when to stop. Their ship traveled often now. Not as fugitives, not as symbols, just as people moving where they were needed. In one system, Salith helped rewrite accessibility standards for public stations. In another, she advised a council on how to replace custodial ownership with voluntary support networks. She never used her old title. When others tried to use it, she corrected them. I am Salith, she said. That is enough. Jonah watched her with quiet pride. He did not interfere. He did not guide. He stayed nearby, fixing systems, piloting ships, doing the small practical things that kept everything moving. One evening, as they drifted between destinations, Salith sat beside him in the cockpit.
Do humans ever regret being seen as troublemakers? She asked.
Jonah laughed softly. We're used to it. Why? She asked. Why keep pushing systems to change when it would be easier not to? Jonah thought for a long moment. Because, he said, once you see the problem, pretending it's not there feels worse than the consequences of acting. She nodded. That made sense. News continued to spread. Not dramatic headlines, not revolutions, just adjustments, clauses rewritten, options added, words like lifetime quietly removed from contracts. In some places, nothing changed. In others, everything did. Salith received messages from people she had never met, a former ceremonial dependent who had chosen to study, a bonded worker who had negotiated new terms, a caretaker who had learned how to ask instead of decide. She answered as many as she could. Sometimes she only listened. That mattered too. Years passed. Salith grew older, wiser, calmer. Her blindness no longer felt like something to explain. It was simply part of how she moved through the world. One day, she stood before a large assembly. not to argue, not to accuse, but to conclude a long review process. The final recommendations were being accepted. Custodial systems were not outlawed. They were transformed. Choice was now required. Exit clauses were made clear. Consent had to be renewed. Salith listened as the final words were spoken. Then she was asked if she wished to add anything. She stepped forward.
I want to be clear, she said. This did not begin with kindness. Some shifted uncomfortably. It began with discomfort, she continued, with one person refusing to accept that something legal was therefore good. She paused.
If you remember anything from this, she said, remember that dignity does not require permission. The assembly accepted the recommendations, not with joy,
but with understanding. Afterward, Jonah found her standing alone, listening to the distant hum of the hall. It's over, he said. She smiled faintly.
No, it's ongoing.
Just no longer lonely, they returned to the ship one last time. Scythe moved through its familiar space easily. Every sound, every vibration was known to her. She paused in the doorway of her old room. This was the first place I was free, she said quietly. Jonah nodded. You didn't give me freedom, she added. You gave me room to claim it. Jonah smiled. I'll take that. The ship launched. As it moved away, Scythe felt no need to look back. She had learned something important. Freedom was not a moment. It was a habit. Far away, in records and archives, her name appeared only briefly. Seolith of House Virex abdicated. No great titles followed. No heroic labels. Just a note in the margins of history, and beside it, another small note. Contract purchased by human individual. Contract terminated legally.